this on Facebook. But you know. This on Facebook. Let me let other people in. Very good. Don't. I'm just sharing on my phone. There we go. John is here. A nice crowd. Good to see everybody. We're gonna start here in just a moment. If you're on Zoom, please mute yourself or I will mute you. Reminds me of my friend, a kid in one of the summer camps that I worked at. The father was an anesthesiologist. He used to say, either you're going to go to sleep or I'm going to put you to sleep. That's what he would tell his kid. So if you don't mute yourself, I'm going to mute you. Seth will come in a moment. It's good to see everybody, both in person and on Zoom and Facebook and YouTube and all the other wonderful locations. I'm just going to share this in two more places. Good to see you, Kayla Gittel. What a beautiful crowd tonight on a chilly Wednesday night. It's good to see the crowd coming together to study some Torah. Seth will come in and make his coffee in a minute, as if it's 8 o'clock in the morning. You'll get to know Seth. He was at class yesterday. I think he was sitting next to you. Good evening, Jay. Nice to see you from Illinois. I'm talking on my phone. You're trying to keep track of all the people I'm saying hello to. These are all my friends, and they join every Wednesday, almost every Wednesday night. There we go. We are on all our platforms. We are good to go. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is Wednesday night. So if it's Wednesday night, it's Parsha night. And it is the portion of Vayera, the fourth portion in the book of Genesis. And we're going to begin today on page 94. For those of you that, let me let someone else into the class. For those of you that are joining us, no, it's unlocked. Those are joining on the page 94 in the Chumash. And in this week's Torah portion, we learn the story of what the world calls Sodom and Gomorrah. A very, very fun term that people like using, Sodom and Gomorrah, that God is going to come with fire and brimstone and he's going to annihilate whoever you don't like. That's the general term that people use. Anytime they don't like someone, it's going to be Sodom and Gomorrah. The truth is that it happened once. There was one flood in the portion of Noah, and there was one Sodom and Gomorrah when the world struggled with, not the world, but a section of the land of Israel in South Israel by the Dead Sea, Sdoim and Amoira, Admon, Tzvoim, those four neighborhoods, those four cities were decimated by the angels who came and literally fire and brimstone, that's where the term comes from, annihilated. The question is, and it's a question that all the commentators ask, all of students of the Torah ask, why? What did this group of people do to deserve Sodom and Gomorrah more than pick your sin of every decade, every year, every century, every millennium? There's somebody there. There's a group of people that sin horrifically, and yet there's no Sodom and Gomorrah. There's no fire and brimstone. Now, if you study Jewish tradition, you study the Talmud, you study the Medrash, you study the various stories of the Talmud, it is clear that the people of Sodom and Gomorrah had a very long list of things that there was a laundry list of things that they did that were wrong. There was various forms of adultery or sexual immorality involved. There was idolatry involved. There was some kind of murder involved. But there's a lot of times there's murder. There's a lot of times there's adultery. It's not the first time. It's not the last time that the world experienced that. And yet, It was this time that there was fire and brimstone in the world, God sending angels to flip over the cities and destroy them from A to Z, not the other times. So what changed in this particular story? And it's something that we really owe it to ourselves to understand in great depth so that we don't end up having a misguided understanding of what took place and then utilize it for things that aren't true. So if you look in verse 21 on page 94 that I just, or let's go to verse 20. I don't know where Seth is. The funny part is, Seth? Oh, I left it unlocked for you. I didn't know if you, yeah. So did you close? Yeah, just lock it so we know we're good. So in verse 20, it says as follows: keeping to his word, God said to Abraham, since the outcry of Sodom and Gomorrah has become great, and since their sin has become very grave, I will descend now and see if they have actually caused the outcry which has reached me, and there will be destruction. If not, I will know how to punish them. So there was some kind of outcry that really triggered God, if you can use such terms. So God is looking at the behavior, and there's an outcry. And God says, I'm going to look. Abraham is begging God to somehow find a way to forgive them. Maybe there's 50 people that are righteous. Maybe there's 45. Maybe there's 30. Maybe there's 10. So you could find the reason he was desperate, Abraham, because he was a man that epitomized kindness. He was desperate to see if there would be a reason to convince God to forgive them and allow them not to be destroyed. It didn't work. But God said, you know what, I'll give it a shot. I'll try to see. And then God said that if I hear that cry, it's all over. Which cry? Now, if you're a typical Bible student, I sat today for an hour with a wonderful friend of mine here in the community who's Christian, and he's going to remain Christian. He's not looking to change that. We've been conversing for 18 years already. He's a very dear friend. And he's sitting there on his computer with some Bible Gateway, and he's translating from King James. And most of it is okay. I got the point, but the translations are wacko. They're not accurate. So if you read the Bible and you say, okay, God heard the cry, you can say it's just a general term. God heard the cry of the people that were suffering in Sodom and Gomorrah. But which cry? If the people were wicked, whose cry in Sodom and Gomorrah was God paying attention to? So Rashi, the preeminent commentator on the Chumash, says, and I quote the Hebrew, Tzakas riva achas, it was the cry of one young woman, shahargua misa mashuna, which was murdered in a very, very gruesome death, al shenasnu mazin la'ani, because she gave food to a poor person. The people of Sodom and Gomorrah took this young woman, and if you look at the Medrash, it tells us the details. She was secretly giving bread to poor people, but she didn't want to get caught, so she used to hide the bread like in pitchers, and she hoping that no one could catch her. And when they caught her feeding, the crime was feeding the poor. They took her. I remember learning this. Don't ask me why I was taught this in first and second grade. I'm still not sure, but I checked it up today to make sure my teacher wasn't just making it up, but he wasn't. It's in the Medrash. I still don't know why I was taught that at that age. They took her, they pasted honey on her, put her on the wall of the city, and allowed the bees to sting her to death. That's what they did to her in the city of Sodom and Gomorrah. They were sick, twisted, cruel, barbaric people. You know how the last year and a half people say, I don't understand the barbarism and the cruelty of Hamas. And I'm like, yeah, it's horrific to live through it, but it's not new to the world. There's always been entities that are cruel like that. And this is one example. So Rashi says, you want to know what cry God heard that said, you know what, I am not forgiving anybody here. We are decimating this place. If you have a region of people that are so, forget about if you're not hospitable, it's one thing. But if you're so anti-charity and you're so cruel and you're so sadistic that you're willing to kill a girl in the most cruel way because she did the big crime of giving food to a poor person, you don't deserve to survive. That's the basic story, Medrash, Talmud, Rashi, etc. There's a challenge with that. And this is in volume 5 of the Rebbe's edited talks, a very in-depth talk on this topic because I think it's very powerful. Someone needs to mute themselves. Very good. I'm going to help you with that. Very good. So the Rebbe has a challenge. The Rebbe is not challenged. The Rebbe is bothered by Rashi's statement. Why? Because there's a clear verse in the book of Ezekiel, and the prophet Yecheskel, the prophet Ezekiel, who lived in the era of the end of the first temple, when the era when the Babylonians took the Jews into exile. And Ezekiel in chapter 16, verse 49 says, and I quote, literally, this is a biblical verse, "Behold, this was the sin of Sodom, your sister. She and her daughters had pride." What was the Hebrew here? She and your sisters had, she and her daughters, where we go over here, hold on. She and her daughters had pride and peaceful serenity, but she did not strengthen the hand of the poor and the needy. So according to Ezekiel, a clear verse, the reason Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed were because of their cruelty to poor people. Rashi said that was not why they were punished. He says they were punished because they killed the girl. It wasn't about the general cruelty to poor people. It was because they murdered the girl who was being kind to a poor person. Now, when you have a biblical verse in Ezekiel that says clearly that it was not for murder, it was for how they treated poor people, then why would Rashi, okay, Rashi's quoting a Medrash or the Talmud, but Rashi's supposed to give us the most basic understanding of the verse, and seemingly from the most basic understanding of the verse, the reason Sodom and Gomorrah were punished was because they were cruel to poor people, not because they murdered one girl who was kind to poor people. And it may sound, well, what's really the difference? Well, the difference is there's been a lot of societies that have had murderers. Rashi seems to indicate that it was the murder that caused God to destroy the place. And if that is the case, why would this murder be different than any other murder that does not bring God's wrath to the point of decimating the place? Which is where I started. You were not here for that beginning part. Right? There's been murder many times, and there's been mass murder. By the way, there's been murder. Yes, it's cruel and crazy and sadistic and barbaric, but I mean, if you go through 4,000 years of history, right? We're talking about the days of Abraham, so we're talking about almost 4,000 years ago. In 4,000 years, there's been many, many cases of cruelty, sick cruelty that can compare to Sodom, and yet they weren't murdered. So is Ezekiel accurate that it's because of the sin of how they treated the poor? Or is it about the murder of that one girl, and somehow that one girl's murder, as horrific as it is, was enough in that particular case to bring about God's wrath? And what the Rebbe responds and analyzes quite in detail, it's quite an analytical talk, but I think it's so relevant today on it always is, but I always say that I think every Wednesday I say, it's so relevant because it is. It's not archaic. It's so relevant that it's mind-blowing how relevant the Torah is, that it's almost like it was fed for us for today. And what the Rebbe says is that, yes, the primary sin of the people of Sodom and Gomorrah was, like it says in Ezekiel, that they were so nasty to poor people. But not giving charity and not being charitable and not being hospitable and not being kind to strangers and not being kind to visitors, that is not worthy of fire and brimstone and your cities being decimated from A to Z. It's not nice, it's horrible, but if you just take the most basic reading of Ezekiel, it still doesn't add up, because not being kind, charitable, and hospitable does not warrant total decimation of a society. But it was the type of withholding of charity and kindness that made them worthy of being decimated. So Ezekiel's right, but so is Rashi. Because what Rashi is telling us is how extreme the people of Sodom and Gomorrah were. It wasn't just that they didn't believe in giving charity, or that they believed that giving charity was somehow a negative for their society. By the way, both of those ideas still exist. There are people that don't believe charity is a value, right? They'll say, pick yourself up by your own bootstraps to an extreme. Then there are people that will say that by giving charity, you are enabling them. Something we still hear today. Nothing's really changed. Maybe maybe we don't put honey and bees on people. That's probably because it's against the law for the most part, not because there aren't certain people that would do that. So what Ezekiel is saying is, yes, the sin was not just that they didn't give charity, or they were against being kind to others. The sin was that they were so adamant about it, so extreme about it, that they were willing to kill someone who had the audacity of helping a poor person. Now, why does that make them worthy of being put to death? Seemingly, by the way, if you read the continuation, huh?
Same attitude.
Well, the Tower of Babel wanted to fight God.
Yeah.
This wasn't about God. That's a separate conversation, and that, by the way, that exists today just as good. There are people that think that they're smarter than God. There is nothing that has power other than God. There is no such thing as anything outside of God. The idea that you can supersede or overcome or circumvent God in any way is the most ridiculous thing. It comes from the terms of, a self-made man. Self-made? That's idolatry. Self-made. You could say, I worked hard and God blessed me. But the minute God's not in the picture, man, you're off the reservation. But going back to, if you look at Ezekiel itself in verse 50, the next verse, it says, and they were haughty and they committed an abomination before me, so I removed them in accordance with what I saw. Right? So some people say, what was the abomination? The commentaries discuss what was the abomination. And the truth is, in this talk, the Rebbe addresses it, it's quite clear. It was not a different abomination. The abomination was that they were so extreme about not helping those in need that they were willing to kill in order not to allow someone to help someone that's poor. And that level of cruelty was deserving of the city being destroyed.
We studied Avodah Zarah about that place where if you went to the bed and your leg was...
That was done. Very good. So Seth brings up a great point that we studied in the tractate of Avodah Zarah, that the city of Sodom, that cruelty is not as bad as the bees, but if someone came to the town and they were too short, they would put them on a bed that was very long and then stretch their legs for them to the point that it should fit the bed. If they came and their legs were too long, they'd put them on a short bed and then they would chop off part. They were wacko. But don't think that the attitudes that got them there have changed that much. Yes, they were destroyed because they went to an extreme of all extremes, and I'm not accusing our society of being like that, but we have to be very, very careful in our interactions with those who are needy and poor. It's true. You don't want to enable drug dealers or drug addicts. You don't want to enable people that have addictions and challenges, and then you enable them to be, or your cousin who hasn't gotten off the couch in 6 months and enable them not to work. That's not the Torah. The Torah is not saying that. But there are real people with real suffering, suffering is not a thing, but that's a choice, but real pain and real challenges and real illness and real poverty. And it's our job to always have an open heart, even if you don't have money in your wallet, but to always have the heart, and as we said yesterday at JLI, the empathy of knowing how to be there for them as a society and as an individual. And the minute we go down the route of starting to judge people for their poverty, to the point where we try to outlaw Sodom wasn't the whole world, it was just one neighborhood, but we want to outlaw kindness in the name of whatever you want to call it. By the way, I'm not talking about the government. I'm talking about our society, how we individually, how our families, how our communities respond to challenges and to poverty and to homelessness, etc. But here's the $1 million question, because it's not a simple matter yet. We haven't concluded, right? According to Maimonides, the preeminent codifier of Jewish law, the 12th century codifier of Jewish law, Reb Moshe ben Maimon, the Rambam, Maimonides, he says that B'nai Noah, Noahides, which is a term for Gentiles that follow the path of Noah, because they're not Jews and they don't follow the path of Abraham. They are not, one of the 7 Noahide laws is not charity. So how could you punish the Noahites in the city of Sodom who were not Jewish, right? There was no Jews. The first Jew was Abraham. So all these other people in the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, Admah, those four villages, they weren't Jewish. If they weren't Jewish, why are you punishing them for not giving charity if there is no obligation for them to give charity? So you can say they're not nice, they're not this, but to punish, to decimate the whole place for something that they weren't even commanded on, just because, as Ezekiel said, that they did not strengthen the hand of the poor and the needy, for that it's worthy of decimating it. They didn't even have an obligation to give tzedakah, to give charity. So here's where it really becomes fun. And I mean fun because it allows you insight into the Torah's path of understanding that we live in a society where everything is black and white, or at least there's big segments that try to turn everything into black and white. And I guess there is such a thing as black and white only as it relates to God, where it's either on team God or not team God. Either you're with what God says or not. That's the only thing that's black and white. But everything else in the world is gray. And even within Jewish law, within halakha, there's nuance. When you open up any book of code of Jewish law, you read the caveats, you read the little words on the bottom that tell you, well, if the conditions are different, and if this is different, and if this is the situation, it's not gray as a negative, it's just very nuanced. So it's true that if you look at the letter of the law, Noahites, B'nai Noah, Gentiles, the descendants of Noah prior to Abraham, were not officially obligated to give tzedakah, to give charity. But, and here's the big but, all of the 7 Noahide laws, every Noahide on earth, which is every human being on earth, is obligated. The purpose of the 7 Noahide laws was to bring civilization to a place of stability and morality, to keep the world civilized. In Hebrew, it's called Yishuvo Shel Olam, the civilization of the world, the inhabiting the world in a healthy way. So everything everyone does in this world, the reason God created us, including Noahides before the giving of the Torah, before Abraham, is to bring righteousness and goodness and civility to the world. Not just civility in the way we talk to each other. That's a fight in Washington, D.C. Civilization. That civilization should be civilized. Jews, when we are obligated to do our mitzvot of the Torah, God commanded us to bring holiness to the world. A mitzvah is an act of holiness. A Noahide is not obligated to bring holiness to the world. They're obligated to keep the world civilized. That's the 7 Noahide laws. Keep civilization civilized and decent and righteous. So giving tzedakah is not an obligation. But even though they weren't obligated to give tzedakah, when they're so radical against giving tzedakah, that they're stopping other people from giving charity and helping the poor and being hospitable and being kind, to the point that they're willing to kill the person, to murder her because she gave food to a poor person, that's already not just not a commandment, that's a disruption of civilization. And if you're disrupting civilization, that even though you're a Noahide, you're absolutely going to be held liable for it, and punishable in the case of Sodom and Gomorrah by annihilation by God. By the way, no human beings did anything. No human being should ever take the story of Sodom and Gomorrah and say, well, God did it in Sodom and Gomorrah, I'm going to do it to Sudan. Or wherever, pick your location.
Well, God wants to do it to Sudan.
Correct. If God wants to do it, he can do whatever he wants. He always does. But the idea that God is the one that did everything. It was an angel and God. There was no human beings involved in the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. The only human being involved in that story was the few members of Abraham's family that survived, and Abraham begging and beseeching God to maybe find a reason not to do it. And that's where we should be as human beings. When you see suffering, it's not about walking around saying, oh, it's because of this reason and that reason. We have it all figured out. We don't. Our job is when we see suffering in the world, we see pain in the world, we see challenges in the world, we see illness and ailments and poverty, is to do whatever we can to help and to beg God and pray for the people that he finds a way to bring them blessing. But the point is that the reason Rashi says in our Torah portion right here that the cry that God heard that made him finalize his decision to annihilate the place was specifically that girl, because it's all interconnected. Not giving tzedakah, not being charitable and hospitable is not the sin in itself. It's the extreme to which they went with it. And that extreme to which they went with it was so bad that it caused them to even murder a woman because she had the audacity of being kind. And it really goes in, just as a side note, I mean, it's not, it goes into a much bigger conversation, which I think you'll find amusing. At least I did, but maybe not everyone finds the same thing. In case you weren't amused, if you want to take a break from your political amusement, which I highly recommend, at least for a month or two, you should all delete your social media. Just don't look at it. And by the way, if there's anything important you need to know, I'll let you know. I mean, I'll keep an eye on it, but you don't really. Every community should have one person keeping an eye on it, and that's it. But that being said, I found it very amusing because there's a very interesting debate in the Talmud about the mitzvah of procreation. Right? The first commandment of the Torah in Genesis, God says, "Pru revu, you should be fruitful and multiply." The Talmud in Sanhedrin has a discussion. We studied this a while ago. There's a discussion about whether a Noahide is obligated in the commandment of procreation. Is it just in the Torah for the Jewish people, or is it for everybody? Now, in halacha and Jewish law, there are two very vital opinions. One is from Chagiga, one is from Yevamos. The Tosfos has two opinions, whether it's biblically mandated or not biblically mandated, if it's recommended or mandated. These are very nuanced discussions, but I think it's very interesting because most people in America, the only discussion we ever have about procreation is about abortion, which is very fascinating to me because we should, before you get to abortion, you should discuss first the commandment of procreation, right? Procreation for a Jew is definitely mandatory. There's no question. The halacha says that you don't fulfill your mitzvah until you have at least one boy and one girl. And we don't interrupt whoever you are. And there's halacha all about the details of that and how much of it is rabbinic and how much is biblical. But the bottom line is, procreation as a commandment, be fruitful and multiply, is definitely for Jews. The question is, what about non-Jews? So there's an interesting thing in halacha, and that is, right, because by definition, a Noahide should be obligated to do it because it brings civilization. You can't have a civilization without humans. You need humans in the world to have civilization. So there's a discussion in halacha, in the Talmud, that before the giving of the Torah, so before the Torah was given to the Jews, much later with Moses, the obligation to be fruitful and multiply applied also to Noahides. Why? It was the era between the great flood and the giving of the Torah. The Gentiles, the Noahides of the world, needed to be obligated in procreation, not just recommended, but mandated, so that we can create a world of people and create civilization after the flood. Once the Torah was given at Sinai, and now the Jewish people are a formal nation, they are mandated in it, but not necessarily everyone else. Now, it's always a good thing for the civilization of the world. But here's where I think it's fascinating, and I think I have to be careful because every 5 minutes people think it's everything I say, people think I'm associating with politics. For 5 minutes, they think I'm associating with being a conservative. 5 minutes later, they think I'm a hardcore liberal. No one knows because I'm just sharing the Torah. And sometimes the Torah sounds one way and sometimes it sounds another way. So I'll leave you guys guessing to figure out where I stand, but that's not relevant because I'm going to share from the Torah. There's a lot of discussion, and I think it's a valuable discussion, although I don't think it's shared properly. So it ends up being received in a very negative way. Right? You have this constant debate in our country about women's right to choose, which I think, the pro-abortion, or pro-life, which doesn't want to allow abortion. And one of the things you hear on television, I don't have a television, but I see the clips and they go around social media, is that we are all those people who believe that women should not have abortions when the babies are born, to help those children with what they need. with WIC programs, with food stamps, with whatever. Now, as a father, if I have adopted children, my credentials in this world are pretty high. And so I believe there are options for babies. And it's not a political or a religious statement. It's just a factual statement based on my own experience that there are other options that the world at least needs to know about. But I could not agree more, although it's never portrayed in a kind way. It's always in a debate type of way. But I do think we have to be straightforward about it. And it's based on exactly what I'm saying here. And that is, halacha connects the obligation of a nohide with charity to their obligation in procreation. Meaning, before the Torah was given and they were obligated to procreate, it automatically meant that there was some level of obligation in their charity as well, because if there's children being born, you can't neglect them after they're born and say, oh, whoopsie, you had a baby, now you're on your own. You had a baby, and you had a baby because the world needs civilization. We need more people, contrary to everything they're going to say to you about we're overpopulated. Did you ever fly from here to New York? I do all the time. Do you know how much of that flight I'm flying over empty land? Empty land for hours. I'm just looking at grass, if you're lucky. South Dakota, North Dakota, eastern Montana, parts of Minnesota. Then you fly over half of Michigan, it's empty. So stop telling me about overpopulated. The world needs healthy, beautiful children to come into the world and be the future. But we also have to find a way that when there's a struggle for those children, not just throw them into the foster care system or say, well, hopefully someone will adopt them, or, well, whoever gave birth to them should take care of them. There are circumstances that poverty is generally not a choice. People don't wake up in the morning and say, I would like to be poverty stricken. I believe there are things that can help them get out of it. And this is a much bigger discussion, but one thing is certain, that if we believe in procreation, we also have to believe in the concept of kindness and hospitality and charity and benevolence and righteousness and how we deal with those children that God gifted the world. And there is no perfect answer. We could sit here and say, well, in Finland, they figured it out with whatever they have, a fraction of our society. Or as Fabi and I were discussing last night when we were trying to go over our new insanely expensive health insurance for next year. And I was like, she's like, how come Israel has, the incredible system of healthcare? And I said, yeah, they also have about 10 million people, not 350 million. So, I mean, it's very nice conversations, and we should have the conversation, and we should have robust debate, but we should never forget that if we're encouraging a society to be kind, and we don't want to, on some level, turn into a society like Sodom and Gomorrah, and we don't want to turn a society where it does two opposite things at the same time. I think our society should encourage procreation. When I heard that Russian President Putin, which is ironic in itself, considering how many people he kills, but there's a special holiday in Russia where they encourage couples to go have babies, to go conceive babies, and they give stipends and gifts and rewards. I think it's amazing. Go encourage procreation, but don't leave them hanging after the baby's born. Now, generally, I'm not even talking about the government. Communities come together and we help those in need. So if we find out here in our shul that there's a member of our community that gave birth and needs extra help, financial or practical or food or whatever, Jewish communities do this all the time. We take care of each other. There's organizations, there's Shifra and Pu, and there's Bnei Olam, and there's a time. I mean, I can give you the list now. But don't leave people hanging. Because generosity, kindness, and not being cruel, even remotely cruel, is who we are as a people. And I don't mean who we are as a people just as Jews. The people of Sodom and Gomorrah were not Jews, and yet God expected from them too to do two things at the same time: be pro-procreation, but also not abandon people, and not just your people. We're talking about strangers coming to town. I need a place to sleep. I can't afford $500 a hotel in Bozeman for $500 a night. I need a place to eat. Are they just freeloaders? I don't know. And what if they are? Does that mean they shouldn't eat because they're a freeloader? Do you understand the point? The point of the Torah is, that's why I said it's so practical, because these are struggles that we're still struggling with today as a society. And there is a healthy balance. And for us, the healthy balance comes from Torah. But we don't have to listen to the right. We don't have to listen to the left. I don't have to be conservative. I don't have to be liberal. I don't have to be Republican. I have to be Democrat. I don't have to be libertarian or green or yellow or purple, the Green Party, whatever party. I am just a Jew that looks for guidance from Hashem. And what Hashem tells us this week is that the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed because they did not value charity, but they were opposed to it to the point that they were willing to kill for it. And that is what creates the destruction of a civilized society. And that's very dangerous. Does that mean, again, like I said earlier, that I believe we should enable people that are taking advantage of the Jewish community or of the charity organizations? No. I think, sadly, because of the realities, every charity organization in the world, Jew or non-Jew, and Bozeman has many of them, including our own, Project Dignity, you have to always do your due diligence to make sure you're not being taken advantage of, so that real poor people don't end up missing out and not having funds to help really poor people because people took advantage or used the money for things that they shouldn't. But as a general rule, imagine if our society saw everyone with that lens, the lens of kindness, the lens of benefit of the doubt, the lens of tzedakah, the lens of achnosas orchim, of hospitality, the lens of caring about another person. Look at our society would change, because then if we started looking at other people that way, it wouldn't just be about helping them. It would be even the way we talk to them, how we see them. And people say, well, Rabbi, that's, the political. I'm not talking about the government. Dealing with the government, I'll say for people that, I was going to say it's above my pay grade, but I'm pretty sure it's below my pay grade. And dealing with, federal issues and politics, that's not where I'm talking about. I'm talking about how each of us in our community, whether it's Bozeman or Billings or in Tucson, Jan, wherever, or wherever in Florida, wherever our students are tonight, in your community, are you the beacon of kindness, hospitality, and charity, which is very much connected to what we studied yesterday about empathy? Or are you spewing things out of your mouth that sound just a little bit cruel in the name of whatever political thing you're trying to justify? We are not a cruel people. And if we see hardship and don't feel kindness in our heart for that individual who's experiencing hardship, even if the right thing to do is not to help them because you don't want to enable them, but why not have the kindness in your heart? If there's judgment, if there's a little dose of cruelty, like I hope you, then the issue is not them, the issue is you, and that affects our entire society, because we are meant to be Jew and Gentile, son of Abraham and son of Noah, daughter of Abraham and daughter of Noah, are meant to be people of kindness, graciousness, generosity, and non-judgmentalism. So may we never turn into Sodom and Gomorrah. May we never become so cruel and unkind to the point that giving tzedakah to us is a negative instead of a positive. Let me say that in the positive. May we always be those that are adding to the gracious civilization of society, both in bringing new life into the world and caring for their life. And may we never fall into the trap of being cruel in the name of whatever ideology is being shoved down your throat by whatever political idol you've chosen to follow. And that's all across the board, because that politics has turned into idolatry, and we're against idolatry. We're Jews. We have Torah, and Torah says be kind, Torah says be gracious, and Torah says be benevolent. So take deep breaths. And if you think I'm talking about your political candidate, you're right, because I'm talking about all of them. Mm-hmm. So you're absolutely right. And if you think I'm talking about your political ideology, it's probably true too. Let go of the politics. Let's remind ourselves as a society that the most important thing is to be a mensch, to be a kind-hearted, generous benefactor for society, And when we're there for others, Hashem ensures that when we're in need, He is there for us. Thanks for listening. I hope you've been inspired. Alex, I hope you've been uplifted. And we'll see you back here next week. Bezrat Hashem. Have a wonderful evening. Any questions, you can do it now as I end the recorded, the live.